Bryant University. I'm Unnati. I am an Education USA advisor in Kolkata. And I would like to welcome Mr. Andrew and Peter. Andrew will be taking you through the presentation today. And before I introduce him, I would like to quickly talk about Education USA. A lot of you may already be on our listservs since you are attending this session. I would like to just let you know a quick housekeeping item before that we are recording this session. So just for your information. Education USA is a US government supported body which is the official source of information about higher education in the US. We are located in 440 plus centers around the globe, and we have 7 of these centers in India. Currently, due to the situation, we are going virtual, and we have a series of virtual events which are free of cost, which you can view at your own time in your home. We do have 7 centers, and here is the contact information. You can note down the information of the working phone number and email ID of the center closest to you. We also provide one-on-one counseling, which is also, we do have virtual counseling as well, where you can be paired with an advisor like myself in getting all your needs met for higher education in the US. Also follow us on Facebook at Education USA India for more updates about such events like today. So before further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Andrew Kupec, who will be taking us through the presentation today. He is the Associate Director of International Admissions at Bryant University. This is a liberal arts university at Rhode Island, and he has over 7 plus years of experience working with institutions that are NCAA Division I as well as Division II. For those who don't know much about this, we will be covering it in the presentation. He is also himself a Division II athlete, a former Division II athlete. So this topic actually holds a special place in his heart, and he's very enthusiastic about helping young students like you who want to apply through an athletics path into the US higher education system. So so handing it over to Andrew.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Unnati. And like she said, I know it might not look like it anymore, but I was a Division II athlete many years ago now. So this topic does hold a special place in my heart. I had a tremendous experience as a student athlete through NCAA Division II sports. And I think it provides a lot of value for students. And then also in my role now, I understand that the athletic recruiting process can be very convoluted and it can cause some confusion for students. So I hope that what we talk about in the presentation today will help give you some tips and some ideas of how you can manage the athletic recruitment process and how that kind of comes together with your college search process as well. And some things you need to do to make sure you find yourself in a good fit both academically and athletically. I want to give just a brief introduction to Bryant University. So we are located in Smithfield, Rhode Island, on the east coast of the US, right up the road from Providence, which is the state capital of Rhode Island. We're about an hour from Boston and about 3 hours from New York City. We have about 3,500 undergraduate students on campus at Bryant. About 80% of all of our students live on campus, so it's a very residential community. One way in, one way out. It's a very traditional US college campus that gives our students a true community feel throughout their experience. The Bryant University was founded in 1863, so a long history, but we've only been in Smithfield since the early 1970s. Bryant's on a great upward trajectory. We've moved up 17 spots in our US News and World category over the last 16 years. We have an AACSB accredited College of Business. So we have, an international business program that's ranked in the top 25 top 25 in the country by the US News and World Report. Various other business programs that are ranked in the top 10 by College Factual and USA Today. But the hallmark of a Bryant education is really the combination of business and the arts and sciences. So we have a College of Business and a College of Arts and Sciences. So all of our students that major in business will minor in something from the arts and sciences, and vice versa. Our students that major in the arts and sciences will minor in something for business. It gives you a very well-rounded education. It makes you very attractive to employers. And our graduates have been very successful. 99% of last year's class was employed or in grad school upon 6 months from graduation with an average starting salary of $60,000. So if you do have more questions about Bryant or you ever need anything, we will give you my information and Peter's information. You could always reach out to us if it's something you're interested in. But turning back to the topic at hand here, just want to give you a quick introduction to the different sanctioning organizations for college athletics in the United States. So the first is the NCAA. This is comprised or made up of two-year institutions, so community colleges and junior colleges. You're still competing at a very high level academically. It's a great path for students that might not meet academic requirements or want to get a baseline of academics before transferring into an NAIA school or an NCAA school. The NA and also there's about 525 institutions in the NCAA. I'm sorry, you nutty? Oh, and then the NAIA is a smaller sanctioning organization. There's about 300 schools. They tend to be smaller athletic programs. You could really equate Division I NAIA to really what would be a Division II level at the for NCAA in terms of competition. I don't know if anybody are you familiar with the Chicago Bulls from the 1990s, or if you're watching the Last Dance documentary that's currently airing now. But both Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman actually both attended NAIA schools. So there is some good paths through those athletic programs. And then the NCAA is the most popular sanctioning organization, probably the most influential, probably the most famous in terms of U.S. institutions. There's 1,268 different schools that have an NCAA distinction. And the NCAA is responsible for, organizing championships and really monitoring athletics. And then within the NCAA, schools are comprised of different conferences. So for example, Bryant is in the Northeast Conference with about 12 other different institutions, and that comprises that NEC conference, which is housed or in the umbrella of the NCAA. And what the NCAA did is, I'm just going to give you before we talk about the different divisions, I want to give you a quick introduction. So this is a complete list of all the NCAA sports that are awarded championships by the NCAA. So essentially recognized by the NCAA. I don't have to read this whole list for you. But this is across all divisions, so Division I, II, and III. It can vary by institution, so not every institution will offer all of these sports. For example, at Bryant, we don't have a wrestling or a water polo program. It could vary in terms of if it's offered as a men's sport or if it's offered as a women's sport. From institution to institution, it could vary if they offer scholarship for that particular sport or if they don't offer scholarship for that particular sport. So for example, Division II institutions do offer scholarship, but I know some Division II ice hockey programs will not offer athletic scholarship. So it's important to know if the sport is offered at the institution you're looking at, what level, and if scholarship is available. I know one of the sports that's not listed on here that's very popular is rugby. Rugby is actually not an NCAA sport, but it's actually offered as a club sport. And it's really one of the most popular club sports in the US. We have a club rugby team at Bryant, both men's and women. They compete at a really high level against other schools. You compete for a national championship. I've seen, Division I rugby matches on TV before, but it's just not an NCAA sport. So if you look at the NCAA, they created 3 different divisions. So Division I, II, and III. And the idea is to align like-minded campuses in the areas of philosophy, competition, and opportunity. So really just to strike a balance in terms of competition. So for example, Division I institutions tend to be the highest level of competition with the most highly sought after recruits with really top athletic ability. So having them play against a Division III institution would create an unfair advantage. And so that's why these different divisions were created. So you can see here the median undergraduate enrollment at a Division I institution is 8,960 students. And there's 350 Division I institutions. And if you're on one of these campuses, you know, the typical ratio is 1 in every 23 students would be a Division I student athlete. Now, I told you Bryant is a Division I institution in terms of athletics. We only have 35 undergraduate students at our school. That's a size that we believe provides a lot of value for our students. So it will vary in terms of size. Division I typically has the most scholarship opportunities in terms of athletics. There are some full scholarship opportunities, but I would not go into your athletic search expecting to receive a full ride. About 50% of student athletes will receive athletic scholarship at the Division I level. And moving on to Division II, you can see these tends to be a smaller medium. Oh, I'm sorry, if you just don't mind muting yourself for a second, that would be great. Thank you very much. So you can see Division II tends to be a little bit of a smaller institution. Median undergraduate enrollment is 2,428 students. If you're walking around one of these Division II institution campuses, about 1 in every 10 students will be a student athlete. And there's 310 different Division II NCAA institutions in the US. Division II most likely is going to be a partial athletic scholarship. You will find full scholarships sometimes in sports like basketball, but at a Division II institution, about 60% of student athletes will receive some type of athletic specific aid. And then if you look at Division III, the median undergraduate enrollment here is 1,740. There's about 438 different Division III institutions that make up 40% of all the NCAA schools. And if you're walking around one of these campuses, about 1 in 6 students will be an athlete. One of the important things to know about Division III is athletic scholarship is not offered at this level. But I will say about 80% of student athletes will receive non-athletic aid. So there is still opportunities to receive a nice financial aid package to attend a Division III school, but it will not be in the form of an athletic scholarship. And the competition level, again, really, you know, Division I tends to be the most competitive, followed by Division II and Division III. And a lot of that has to do with the resources and money available to students and to recruits. There are exceptions. There's some really strong Division III programs that probably could compete with some Division II and vice versa and so on. So it varies a little bit, but that's typically the way it'll break down in terms of competition level. One of the important concepts you'll hear throughout your recruiting process is eligibility. So every single student that wants to play an NCAA sport at the Division I or Division II level will have to create an account with the NCAA Eligibility Center. I highly recommend doing this as soon as possible. So if you're in your 10th grade year or even your 11th grade year, I would go ahead and create an account with the NCAA Division Eligibility Center. You can do that at ncaa.org/student-athletes-future, or you can just Google Eligibility Center and you'll find the ability to create this account. Division III, you don't have to create an account, and that's because athletic scholarship is not offered to you. You can still create a profile page to kind of follow some of the steps of recruitment, but typically you'll see at the Division III level, you just need to meet the admission standards of the institution, and that will be sufficient for NCAA eligibility. And the next piece of that is your amateur status. So every student that's going through the NCAA recruitment process and eligibility process will have to get their certification in amateurism. The reason for this is the NCAA is in charge of making sure that, you know, student athlete, the student piece of that stays first. So the NCAA wants to maintain amateur athletics. They want to make sure that students are going to colleges and universities to focus on their academics first, and that the athletic piece is just a part of their experience. So that's why it's important for the NCAA to maintain that philosophy and that status for student athletes. So if you think about kind of proving your amateur status or what the NCAA looks at to make sure that you've maintained that, you can see a few examples of reasons why students might lose amateur status with the NCAA. So if you had a gap in terms of when you're graduating from your secondary school or your high school to full-time college enrollment, there's a possibility that could create a reason to jeopardize amateur status. If you receive payment from a team to participate, if you receive prize money from a team, if you're represented by an agent, if you're actively promoting or endorsing a product or a service, these can all be reasons to jeopardize your amateur status, which would make you ineligible to participate in NCAA sports. So it is important that if you're thinking about pursuing athletics in the U.S. at the NCAA level, not to take prize money and not to take some of these steps. But the NCAA is there to work with you, and as well as the coaches that are recruiting you and the athletic departments that are recruiting you at various institutions can help support you with this. So this is just a screenshot I took from the international academic requirements from the NCAA. This might be a little bit foreign to you in terms of the way that it's listed out, but this is really what the NCAA is looking at from your secondary high school courses to show your academic eligibility. I wouldn't worry too much about this if it looks like it doesn't exactly line up with your curriculum. I will tell you, every year students from IB, A-levels, ISC curriculum, CBSE, ISCE are all eligible academically to participate in NCAA sports. So the NCAA is very familiar with, transcripts from India and other curriculums around the world, and they know how to align these credits to make sure that you're filling the right requirements. Having said that, it is still important that you submit these documents with the NCAA and you show that your coursework at the secondary school level is sufficient to be academically eligible. Again, I mentioned the JUCO, so the junior college or the community college transfer route. Sometimes students that don't make these course requirements or don't make GPA requirements will use that model to still compete athletically and then transfer to an NCAA school. If you look at academic requirements further, at the Division I level, they require a minimum GPA of 2.3 on a 4.0 GPA scale. And for Division II, it's a 2.2 out of a 4.0 GPA scale. And that's just a minimum requirement required by the NCAA. Typically, the admission standards for the institution will be much higher. So for example, the average GPA for our accepted class at Bryant is about a 3.4 out of a 4.0 GPA. Just kind of showing you that the NCAA requirements are pretty minimal, and that if you're meeting the admission standards for the institution you're looking at, in most cases, you're going to have a good chance of being eligible for the NCAA. Grades are all converted onto this 4.0 GPA scale. On the next slide, I'm going to show you an example of how the NCAA and how an institution might convert some of those grades. There actually is, if you just search Guide to International Academic Standards, you can actually find, there's a whole PDF document you can download, and it can show you country by country and curriculum by curriculum, how the NCAA converts grades. A lot of times, Peter and myself will use the NCAA scales to convert grades from different curriculums, but we use our own judgment for scales, and we disagree with the NCAA a little bit, but that's a good guideline for you to use. It's also important that the NCAA, if you're thinking about playing an NCAA sport, they require an SAT or an ACT score. So you're going to have to take that exam. There's no set limit on how many times you can take it. They will super score the exam. So for example, if the first time you take your test, you do really well in the evidence-based reading and writing, but not so hot on the math. And the second time, it's kind of vice versa. You do really well in the math. The next time, really not as great in the evidence-based reading and writing. They'll take the best of the both sections to super score. You will have to send your SAT or your ACT scores to the NCAA Eligibility Center. And then you can see their code there is just 9999. At the Division I level, to prove eligibility, they will use the sliding scale. So essentially, they're matching your test scores with your GPA. So essentially, the higher your GPA, the lower you can score on the SAT. And the lower your GPA, the higher you'll need to score on the NCAA to be academically eligible for Division I athletics. Again, this is very minimal requirements. The admission standards are usually much higher. If you took a 3.0 or a 3.4 student, for example, which would be the average GPA at Bryant, the SAT you have to score would be very low. I believe it's about somewhere in the 800s. So it's very feasible. Division II is a little bit different. They just have a hard cutoff. You need to score 820 or higher on the SAT total score, or a sum score of 68 on the SAT. This is the quick grade example that I told you. So you can see, you know, the CBSE, this is right from the International Guide from the NCAA. You know, a grade of A2, they would convert to an A, which is a 4.0 GPA. So for example, a student that's all C1s and C2s, you know, that would convert to a 2.0 GPA, and that would be a little bit below the minimum requirement for the NCAA eligibility. But again, you know, the admission standards typically are going to be higher than the minimum standards, depending on the institution. Once you prove that you have amateur status and you're eligible and you've been recruited, you're also expected to maintain your eligibility with the NCAA. And that varies from division to division, but essentially what it's telling you is you need to keep up your coursework, so with pace to graduation, and you have to maintain a certain level of academic success. So for example, at the Division I, by the time you're done with 2 years, you have to have at least 40% of your coursework towards your graduation complete. So at Bryant, through your first 2 years, the typical student would take a total of 20 courses and complete 20 courses. At a very minimum, to maintain eligibility, you'd have to complete 16 courses in your first 2 years. At the Division I level, the GPA requirement is set by the school. At the Division II level, you have to maintain a 2.0 GPA. At Division III level, you have to maintain satisfactory progress and good academic standing with the institution. Division II is a little bit different, and they're per credit. You can't fall more than 6 credits behind your graduating class. Very similar to the percentage of Division I. The best advice is just to maintain a typical graduation schedule. Most of our student athletes at Bryant, you know, aren't falling behind in terms of course credit, and they're kind of staying on a similar path that a typical Bryant student would go on. But you do have options to give yourself more flexibility with summer courses, because there's high demands in terms of time for student athletes. You're giving a lot of time to practice, to watching film, to strength training, to meetings with your coaches. So there are some way to create some flexibility in your schedule to give yourself some more time. Just quick kind of terminology around recruiting, just so you have an understanding if you hear some of these things. A coach contact is tracked by the NCAA, and essentially it's something more than hello from the coach. It's a more formal visit or more formal conversation in some way. Evaluation period is when a coach is allowed to visit your high school, evaluate you, watch you play, but they're not allowed to contact you directly. A quiet period means that you're only allowed to meet with a coach on campus. Dead period means that a coach is allowed to call or write you, but they're not allowed to have in-person visits. Official visits would be any time that a college or university is paying for your visit to come on a recruiting trip, where an unofficial visit would just be if you came to campus and met with a coach, but monetary funds weren't being provided for you to visit. There is a certain number of limit of official visits that a particular recruit or student athlete can have. The NCAA does this to make sure that the recruiting process is fair for all institutions, that it's not putting too much pressure and communication for student athletes. So some of these, you know, quiet periods and dead periods and evaluation periods are put in place to ensure that it's a, you know, fair, safe process for everyone involved. What you will hear sometimes is a verbal commit. So if you verbally commit to a coach, so say they make you an offer and you say, yes, I'm coming, that's what's called to as a verbal commit, but that's not non-binding. What will happen is if you do commit to a particular school, you'll get a national letter of intent. You'll hear it called an NLI. Once you sign this NLI, you are committed to coming to that institution and competing for a minimum of 1 year. So that is binding. just be very careful before you sign an NLI that you know that that is your final decision, because you will be binded to that school for a minimum of 1 year, and you cannot compete at any other U.S. NCAA institutions until that 1 year is complete. Important dates for you as you're starting this process: June 15th after your second year of secondary school or high school, or September 1st of your third year or your junior year of high school or secondary school. Depending on the sport, those are the dates when coaches for particular sports can start to contact you. Before those dates, they're not allowed to contact you. If you contact them, they can give a response or a limited response just saying that they can't talk with you yet. But just so you know, I would find out for your sport, what are the NCAA dates that you can start, that coaches can start to contact you. And this can give you a good idea of when you should really start to ramp up your recruiting process. So I would start to really think about reaching out to coaches either June 15th after your second year or September 1st in your third year, because this is really when you can start to create conversations and relationships with coaches around the country. And it is important to know that, coaches really dictate the whole recruiting process. Peter and I work in admissions. We're there to support the athletic office, but coaches are responsible for managing their roster sizes, for recruiting student athletes, and they really pick, who's recruited and who scholarship dollars are going to. Just some advice to start the recruiting process. The best thing you could possibly do is to talk to a coach, whether that's through a national team or a high school team or any level of competition, to have an honest and open conversation of what is a realistic level of competition for you. Is it Division I? Is it Division II? Is it Division III? Is another option and then a transfer route a better route for you in terms of your level of ability as a student athlete? I had a conversation with my high school coach in 2007, and he kind of told me he thought I could play at the Division II or the Division III level, and having that open conversation really helped me kind of focus my athletic search and kind of helped me figure out what would be good fit institutions for me as well. From there, once you have a pretty good idea of where you think you could play, I would work with your counselor. I would work with coaches again to create a list. You can work with EducationUSA as well to create a list of schools that are the appropriate athletic level, but also from an academic and student life standpoint, have things that you'd be interested or attracted to. Once you kind of create that list, you also want to create a resume with any athletic achievements. So if you have a national ranking, if you won tournaments or competitions, if you have anything that really makes you stand out as an athlete, put this on that resume. It's also really important that you, if you can, put together a highlight tape or game film from you competing as an athlete. It's very difficult for coaches to separate one athlete from another they're recruiting, especially if they're not able to see them in person. So if you're able to give some video evidence, this might help a coach, start to have a conversation with you or consider you for a roster spot. Also, don't hesitate to reach out to coaches. All their contact information will be on the websites for the different institutions that you're looking for. For Bryant specifically, we have a student athlete questionnaire for each sport. So if you're interested in soccer or football or tennis or volleyball, I would go to that particular sport, fill out the student athlete questionnaire, and then contact the coaches with your resume and your tape if you have that available. And I would also encourage you to send it to all the coaches, right? Coaches get hundreds and hundreds of emails, are contacted by lots of students. Put all the coaches that are available on the website on the email, and you'll have a better chance of a coach kind of seeing this email and responding to you and starting that recruiting process. If you are going to be visiting a school, try to ask in advance if a coach is available. If you kind of show up to Bryant's campus and you ask the day of, we'll try the best that we can, but it's going to be a 50-50 shot of whether coach is available or not. If you ask ahead of time, and this would go for other institutions as well, I would try to see if you can find out if a coach would be available for like an informal meeting or just hello, and that can kind of help start the process for you as well. Just some tips, and I received this from some of my colleagues. the earlier you start with the NCAA, with the admissions, with reaching out to coaches, the better chance you're going to have as a scholarship. If you start later in the process, it's possible that even if you're a really talented athlete, that scholarship dollars have already been used up for that particular year. Again, don't expect full scholarships, but it's going to be a balance of your academics and your athletic ability. So there is a possibility to combine athletic scholarship with academic scholarship. We talked about registering early with the NCAA and the JUCO route. You really want to have a positive attitude through the recruiting process, right? Coaches want talented athletes, but they also want students that are going to fit well on their team, and they're responsible for managing their team, and that's their livelihood and their job. So they want people that are going to fit in well, just like any organization or business would. I can use one example from our tennis coach. He always invites recruits to come with a parent when they're coming on campus, and then he will actually actively evaluate the way that student treats their parent throughout the visit on campus, and that tells them a lot about the character of the particular student athlete that he's recruiting. Take responsibility for your recruitment. You should be, as the student athlete, the one reaching out and connecting with coaches. It shouldn't be a parent or an outside source. That's going to be impressive to coaches. Just because you receive an athletic offer. So if a coach tells you, we'd like to offer you a spot on the team, or we'd like to offer you a scholarship to this particular institution, it doesn't automatically equate to admission. You have to make sure that you're offered a scholarship and that also the admission office says that you're admissible to that particular college or university. We're going to talk about our process for that at Bryant, but it's important to know that you still have to go through the full admission steps, filling out the application and submitting all the required documents and making sure that you're accepted to the institution individually as a student, and you also have an athletic roster spot as well. It's all understand your sport, right? So a sport like track and field has very large roster size. There's going to be more opportunities for students to walk on. There's going to be more opportunities for students to be discovered later in the process. And you probably have a better chance, at least at Bryant, it's going to vary from school to school, of making a track and field team versus a sport like basketball or tennis that have, limited roster sizes. Their recruitment process is usually done earlier. A lot of times for those sports with smaller roster sizes, many of those recruits will be committing to Bryant in their third year of high school. So before they even enter into their senior year. So understand the sport at the particular school that you're looking at, what the roster size and the availability might be. It's also important to think about, are you participating in an individual sport or a team sport? If you are, a tennis athlete, there's a universal tennis ranking that it's very easy for a coach to see what your ranking is. And it's also very easy to evaluate your game film because you're the only one participating on the court. Where for a sport like soccer or football, it's a team sport. It's a little bit harder to evaluate on tape. There isn't a direct ranking that's associated with your position. So understanding that it's probably going to be, especially from overseas, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to be recruited for an individual sport than it is going to be for a team sport. And then also, as you're going through this, understand the coach's perspective. They have limits in terms of budgets and time resources. There are some schools in the U.S. That you might see on TV that have enormous budgets and generate a lot of revenue through their athletic programs, but there's a variety of different schools. So schools will be limited in terms of what they can do from a budget and a resource standpoint from recruitment. There's only so many students they can communicate and see. So just understand that. We talked about roster size. Understand that coaches are also relying on the decisions of other students and coaches. So a school might be waiting for a recruit to hear back if they're committing to their school, and then if they decide to go somewhere else because a coach influences the student athlete, it puts the coaches in a tough position to understand who they can make offers for. So if there are times where there's lapse of communication, just understand that might be the situation. We talked about the difficulty in evaluating ability on film. So understand that happens. Coaches, because of the lack of time, sometimes will use their connections. So for example, our women's basketball team has a great connection, or the coach has a relationship with a coach in Spain. So they're able to kind of recruit, and they're able to rely on that coach in Spain to give recommendations on recruits. So if a coach doesn't have a connection in a particular country or area, they might feel a little bit less confident in the student athlete that they're recruiting. Coaches get an enormous amount of communication from student athletes, so please, be patient with them. Recruitment's just one piece of their job. They have a lot of other things to manage and to do. I wanted to address quickly the impact of COVID-19 in terms of how it will impact athletic scholarship. At Bryant University, I don't see it impacting our athletic scholarship offerings, but again, as the situation unfolds and it's fluid, we'll continue to see how that goes. But I will say, throughout the U.S., if COVID-19 has a financial impact on institutions, and again, I don't think this is the case at Bryant, but they will start to evaluate having certain sports and the amount of money that will go towards the budget and for scholarship for those particular sports. I want to quickly talk about the early read process. So this is going to vary from school to school, but this is really how it's been done at the two schools that I've worked at. So both a Division II institution and a Division I institution. And the early read process is essentially a communication between the admission department and the athletic department. A lot of times student athletes will commit to sports teams very early in their high school career. So they need to get information from the admission office if a student is eligible for admission earlier in the process. So what will happen is a coach will contact us and ask a student to fill out an early read application. So it's kind of a shorter application, but has a lot of similar information to what's on the common application. We'll ask for any available transcripts with current grades. We'll ask for their SAT or ACT scores or their test optional responses. Bryant is a test score optional institution, so you do have the choice there. You would need to submit your SAT or ACT with the NCAA, but you don't have to submit them for Bryant admission. We would take that information. We would tell coach, one, is that student athlete admissible to the school? So essentially you can continue to recruit the student athlete. And two, we would give a predicted merit scholarship. So we would tell you any merit scholarship or academic scholarship that would be offered to you. This helps coach understand what type of financial package they can put together for you from an athletic standpoint. But it also gives the student clarity to know that Bryant or whatever particular school you're looking at is going to be a viable option in terms of both financially and in terms of admission. Again, varies from different school to different school. It could vary from sport to sport at a particular school, but that's just a little insight into how we handle the process at Bryant University and how it could work if you're interacting with one of our coaches. I'm going to give you last advice, and then I definitely want to make sure we have time for questions and answers. But the last advice I would give to you is select a school that you could see yourself attending regardless of athletics. Sometimes athletics really drives this process, and it is important, and it's a big part of your college experience, but things happen, injuries, you might just lose passion for a particular sport. And at the end of the day, a very small percentage of college athletes will go on to play professional sports. So understand that your academics and your path there in terms of career opportunities still needs to be your focus as a student athlete. So if you just pick a school because of athletics and for some reason the athletics piece of it goes away and you're really unhappy at that institution, it's not going to be a good fit for you. So try to evaluate athletics and then academics in two different silos. And if they both match up, then you found a really good fit for you as a student. But thank you very much for listening. I hope you got some good information and some advice through there, but I'll give a few minutes for some questions and answers. And I put Peter and I information here, so please feel free to email us or WhatsApp us or follow us on social media and direct message us. So we'll make sure we get you answers to all your questions. But Peter, do we have any questions at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Great presentation, Andrew. I'm going to give we have some over in the chat box and I'll read them up because I think they're great. But we have a brave soul over there who's actually raised their hand, and I believe Aditya. Would you please unmute your mic and raise your question, please? Thank you.
Hi, this is Ashfaq. Is there any scholarship for a rugby player?
I can speak specifically to Bryant University for rugby. We don't have athletic scholarship for rugby, but students are still eligible for all of the merit scholarships. And for us, those merit scholarships can range anywhere from $5,000 to $35,000 per year. They're really dependent on your academic performance, GPA, test scores, and all the other pieces that go into your application. I can't speak for all institutions, though. I'm sure there are some club rugby teams that do offer some financial support for rugby players. I'm assuming it's most likely in a partial scenario, but again, this is where it kind of becomes a little convoluted, and it's going to vary from school to school.
Okay, I still think that Aditya is out there. So Aditya, if you find the unmute, please feel free to unmute. But in the meantime, I will ask the next question. And I think we kind of went over that. Shanti is asking, so basically you need to send 2 applications, right? So you send one to the NCAA and one to the university you're applying for.
Essentially, the university you're applying to, that applications, that's more of the formal process when you're sending all of these documents and going through the typical admission process. You will have to send a lot of the same documents to the NCAA, but it's not, I mean, it is an application in a sense, but it's just confirming your eligibility status from an amateur standpoint and from an academic standpoint. So yes, I mean, in a way it is 2 applications, but you can do the NCAA earlier in the process.
Kritika is asking, it's sort of like the same, when to start reaching out to coaches in class 10, 11, or 12.
Yeah. So again, this depends on their sport. So I would look on the NCAA website to find out when coaches from your particular sport are able to reach out to you. It would either be June 15th. So after June 15th of your second year in school. So after your 10th grade year, or coaches can start to reach out to you. Or September 1st of your third year, depending on the sport, is when coaches can start to reach out to you. So I would say, because coaches can respond to you at that point, those would be really good dates to start to reach out to coaches. Again, you'll just have to look up which date fits for your sport.
Andrew, I just had a follow-up to that. So you would make an NCAA profile, and then coaches could reach you through that application, right? They will contact you based on the profile you've created, NCAA profile.
That's a possibility, but most likely coaches aren't going into the NCAA Eligibility Center to reach out to recruits. In terms of getting noticed by a coach, it's better to email them directly or to fill out a sport questionnaire specifically on a certain school website. So if you wanted to get recruited by Bryant, the best first step is to go to the volleyball page and fill out the student athlete questionnaire for volleyball, because that information will funnel directly to the coach.
Right, and one would do so in, say, class 9 or 10, like you said, right? As early as as beginning of high school, they could start approaching coaches to get notice.
They absolutely could. I think grade 9 might be a little bit early because you don't have, unless you're really just a superb, phenomenal, like top 1% athlete, you're really not going to have enough information for students to start the recruitment process, and coaches can't respond to you yet. So really it's going to be the end of your second year or the beginning of your third year is when, the recruitment process is really going to ramp up, but you can start to plan for some of these steps in grade 9 and grade 10.
Okay, thank you.
Susan had basically a follow-up question for that, and I'll just emphasize in Brian's case, because I do know the answer to that. She was asking when to complete the student athlete questionnaire. Bryant University's website, which I will send in just a moment to everyone for the Bryant Bulldogs, there is a student questionnaire on there, and that's probably the first step. Andrew, I think you would probably agree that you would connect unless if you have a direct contact already with the coaches. Most schools should have that. If they don't, then maybe they're not as sophisticated. I don't know.
Yeah, but also don't be afraid to fill out the support questionnaire and then follow up, a few weeks later, a month later with a specific email to the coach with your athletic resume and film if you have it.
Okay, the next question is, can international student not recruited through the NCAA in their freshman year, is there an opportunity to apply in the following year when the student will be enrolled in the university?
So there are some opportunities to walk on. And again, this is going to vary by sport to sport. I would say it's easier to walk on to track and field than it would be to basketball. But every sport does have tryout opportunities and walk-on opportunities. You can approach the school, the coach at the school that you're attending, and those cases do happen. There are students that are overlooked through the recruiting process. They don't get the necessary attention that they need, and for whatever reason, they slip through the cracks, and they're able to walk onto teams and have successful careers. I will say that's going to be a small percentage, though. Especially at the Division I level, the vast majority of players on the team are going to be recruited student athletes. I would say the lower you go, so Division II and then Division III, I'd say at the Division III level, you have a much higher chance of being able to walk on, but it does happen at all levels. And by walk on, I mean join the team without being recruited once you're a student there.
Suda-san, he is asking a question that relates to the different competitive levels from country to country. How do you assess the standard of an applicant, say, for example, in soccer player?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, you know, I don't even have the answer to that. I think, you know, a head soccer coach would better be able to answer that question because they're the ones looking at the film and evaluating players from different levels of competition. I would say the higher level of competition you are, the more likely you have to be recruited. But a lot of times, again, coaches are going to rely, especially from different countries, they're going to rely on any context they have in that particular country. So if a coach of ours happens to have a contact with one of the national teams in India, you know, they're going to feel more comfortable with the level of competition because they have a direct source that's able to provide them, you know, feedback on the level of competition that player has pursued. So really, you know, that's a question we would have to ask a head soccer coach at the NCAA level.
I will just make a note on that. I know in my past, I have had coaches coming to me and ask if I had any specific knowledge about either a region or a country or something that maybe they weren't familiar with after they had gotten a contact. And that's where our little role comes in sometimes. But we will obviously help as much as we can. The next question is really a great one, and it's a very personal one, Andrew. Does Bryant give full scholarship to international students?
So again, my advice is always go into the admission process and the athletics scholarship process not expecting a full scholarship. There are certain, like basketball does have full scholarship opportunities. There are some sports that have, you know, higher budgets and more funds that are able to provide really nice scholarship opportunities for students, but I really wouldn't expect a full scholarship. You know, a student at Bryant, from a merit scholarship standpoint, can be evaluated for scholarship anywhere from $5,000 to $35,000 per year, and the $35,000 is very competitive, but it is achievable. But I would expect even more from the $5,000 to $27,000. But if you are a really good student with good courses, good test scores, or good test score optional essays, and you get a higher merit scholarship, what that will do, and a lot of coaches rely on this, they will recruit better students because they're able to put together financial aid packages. They can add some athletic scholarship dollars on top of that merit scholarship to make a very attractive package for a student athlete. But again, there are very rare full scholarship opportunities, but I wouldn't expect a full scholarship, at least at Bryant.
This was a question that was not raised in here, but I think it's an important one, and it's kind of similar to that. Can you tell us about the difference between maybe scholarship level available to female athletes and male athletes? Because I know I tend to see a difference between the two.
Yeah, so the NCAA does have some very strict what we call Title IX regulations, and essentially Title IX refers to a balance between genders in terms of sports. So making sure that female and male athletes do have similar scholarship opportunities. Again, sometimes it boils down to just the budget for an individual sport. You know, some of the more popular sports like American football or basketball or baseball or lacrosse, sometimes they're going to have larger budgets because one, that they're more popular, and two, there's a chance that they might be revenue generating sports. And especially for schools that have teams that are generating revenue, they're going to have larger budgets and more scholarship opportunities. So in some cases, you might see some discrepancies between, you know, male and female scholarships, but the NCAA does try to make sure that there's a balance and it's fair for both male and female athletes. And I think that is the right thing that they try to do.
That's a great answer. The last question I officially have on the line here, although I think another one just came in, is at what level of a sport does one have to be eligible as a sport recruit? It's a little bit similar, I think, to the other. It's kind of difficult to say, obviously, but any last word on that?
I don't think that it has to be a particular level. But I will say that coaches are going to start recruiting at the highest levels of competitions, at the national level, you know, in the U.S. for like the AAU basketball circuit. Those are the easiest places it's the most effective use of their time and the place that they're going to find the right caliber athletes for their programs. It's a little bit harder and takes more time for them to find student athletes that might be at lower competition. You really have to be dominating or superior if you're at that lower level of competition for a coach to notice you. So there's no set answer, and trust me, students are recruited from all different competition levels just depending on their individual ability. But typically the higher competition level you're participating in high school is going to give you more exposure.
And just to add to that quickly, I think it's important to mention that NCAA is just one of the ways you can play sports in US colleges. There are, like Andrew has been mentioning throughout the presentation, club level sports as well, which is fairly competitive. And they can actually be an attractive reason why you are actually given a merit scholarship at the college. Like you all know, with Education USA and on your own, you do fill out an activities list. And if they see a sport which you can play in the college, you can always apply in the normal route and be eligible for a merit scholarship. You can also play intramural sports. So this is the kind of sports in which you just play against each other within the college. It's not really for scholarship or any other reason, but there are ways of still availing of the very fabulous facilities that US colleges have in terms of sport, regardless of by not even being a student athlete. And again, you can go into the college and then very rarely, but still think about walking onto certain teams which do allow it.
Yeah, United, that's a great point. Club sports, particularly at Bryant, are awesome opportunities. Even at the club sport level, you have a coach, you have access to the personal trainer, you have access to the strength and conditioning facility, all the athletic facilities, and you still compete against other colleges and universities, typically more of a regional competition. But our club sports teams do go on to national competitions. Our cheer and dance team won a national championship. Our ultimate frisbee team won a national championship. And then intramural sports are an awesome way to continue to compete as well. I'm a very proud dodgeball champion from my college days.
That's great.
Yeah.
I got one more question coming in, Andrew, and I also want to say thank you for the positive comments that we have gotten about the presentation to everyone and for everyone listening. To get recruited for NCAA scholarships, are there limitations in sports types? I'm guessing the different types of sports.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it does vary. You'll find that certain sports are going to have more scholarship dollars to give. I use the example of Division II hockey, ice hockey, and there's actually, even though Division II has athletic scholarships, they don't provide athletic scholarships for Division II hockey. So there are examples where, and then Division III schools don't offer scholarship at all. I mean, you can still eligible for financial aid and merit scholarship. but it is going to vary from school to school, to sport to sport. So it is important to start to have those conversations with coaches and what's available.
Okay. Yeah, I think there was one last question I noticed somewhere about rugby. Is that a NCAA sport? And I think you have already addressed this, but just to refresh.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's not an NCAA sport, but it does have a very popular competition level in U.S. colleges and universities. There is a rugby association where different colleges and universities can compete against them. The Rugby Association, I believe, even has their own divisions. So at Bryant, we do have a men's and women's rugby team. They compete, both nationally and regionally. I've seen examples of lots of different colleges, even on TV, playing rugby. So it is a very popular sport. It's just offered as a club sport and not an NCAA or an NAIA sport.
Thank you. I think we have covered most of, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, of the questions that were asked on the chat box.
Yes, we did. But I see Aditya's hand is still up. I don't know if that's
maybe it was a mistake. It could have been a mistake. Maybe.
I don't know.
Aditya's hand. Aditya, do you want to say something? You can unmute your mic.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, your hand was up. Did you have a question?
इसमें कोई एज है कि इतने साल तक इसमें जाने के लिए?
Okay, so what Aditya is asking is there any kind of age where you are only eligible till a certain age to apply for NCAA?
No, there actually is no restriction on age. Every now and then you'll see really cool stories about, older people that went back to college or universities that participated in NCAA. But I will say you essentially have 5 years to complete. You have 4 years of eligibility to compete, and you have to complete that in 5 years. So once you fully enroll at an institution or a university, your clock starts ticking towards those 5 years. So
Okay.
if you can't graduate and then go back to another college or university and participate in athletics because you already used up your 5 years. But there's no particular age associated with it. It's just kind of the time bracket that you have to use your eligibility.
Right, thank you. Aditya, did you get your answer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So, great. So I think we can wrap up now. Thank you so much, Andrew and Peter, for this wonderful presentation. I think I learned a lot from the admissions point of view about how to begin the process as a student athlete early on, as soon as possible, fill out the NCAA website for eligibility criteria, and then again try to compete at high levels in your country to be noticed by the contact points that coaches do recruit from. And like they have also mentioned, it is important to do the rest of the eligibility criteria as well. After you get that verbal confirmation from your coach or your letter of intent, you have to, it's a conditional offer, you have to do the rest of the application process, which includes the test scores, which includes the essays, letters of recommendation, your academic transcripts. So this is something that, like Andrew has really emphasized, you do need to have a certain academic background to be able to compete for NCAA sports. So do contact, Peter and Andrew both have put in their email ID. So do contact them for any direct questions. If you want to learn more about a particular sport or coaches, you can do that. You can also contact me. My email ID is also there. For any other admissions things, we can begin your application process with EducationUSA. So like I mentioned in the beginning, you can approach the office, the center closest to you. And thank you so much, Bryant University, for this very innovative presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Good job.
wonder what these scribbles are on the presentation.
Yeah, I didn't know where that came from.
It's like the whiteboard function of Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay, you everyone, you can leave the meeting.
I think it comes from the share screen, like our Excel sheet locks up when we're using that on share screen.
I'm sorry. I have to run, but Nadia, I will follow up with you, and I guess Peter and I will follow up with you. Or does that work?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm also leaving the meeting, so please continue with your.
Okay.
We are done with our weekend, so yeah.